Okay, let's bring in our guests now. We'll start with Vinoo Varghese in New York. Vinoo, you were a former prosecutor. Would you have wanted to drop the charges against Adnan Syed?
I think from reading everything I've read about the case, the answer is yes, easily. It seems, and it's not just the benefit of hindsight, it's the benefit of knowing, being in the system, working in the system, having been a prosecutor and now having done defense work for the better part of my life. This was a case flawed from the beginning. And in the United States, the system is such that if someone probably did it, that's not good enough. And I think that that should be behind every charging decision, particularly at the level of a homicide. So if you don't believe you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt, you shouldn't charge somebody. Here, we've learned, or at least reading the decision of the Maryland Court of Appeals, the highest court in Maryland, that basically Syed was denied justice because of a delay, what they thought was an unreasonable delay, or that he had waived his right to challenge certain evidence because he didn't raise it in an earlier motion. They actually found that his lawyer was incompetent, but that it didn't prejudice him. So what does this mean? What it means for the layman is to understand that basically in America, jury verdicts are holy. They are HOLY. They are meant not to be disturbed, barring something really terrible going on. And for the appellate court, the fact that his lawyer was incompetent by community standards wasn't enough to save him. This is the way the system is built, because they are there to protect their own verdicts. And I know the prosecutor, Vinoo Varghese, who was the person who argued the case on appeal. I actually had lunch with him back in 2018, right before he was in New York. He was running for mayor. I had lunch with him. And he was there. He went the next day or within 2 days to go argue this case in the Maryland High Court. When I hadn't watched Serial. I had read about it. I then saw the HBO documentary, which I thought was really one-sided in favor of the defense. I said, there's got to be something more going on here. But when the appellate decision came out and I read that decision, I looked at it and I said, wow, this guy is really probably innocent. Probably innocent means they shouldn't have charged him. They should drop the case. Probably guilty is not good enough for a conviction in the United States. And based on what was withheld and the points being raised on appeal, this guy deserved much better.
Barbara O'Brien, you also had a big problem with the investigation and the trial itself. Tell us, what concerned you the most?
So, like many Americans, I listened to Serial every week. I couldn't wait for the next episode to drop, but I think it did leave out quite a bit that the undisclosed podcasts dug up and presented later. And from what I've learned from all these different, from this different coverage of this case, what bothered me was, I think, the tunnel vision that the investigators got in this case. The history of misconduct by these particular detectives that was completely glossed over in Serial. And I think it was very disturbing the extent to which the prosecution at the trial level and at pretrial really tried to use Adnan Syed's religion against him, as depicting him in a way that his past behavior simply did not support. So I think that there was a number of things. I mean, I could talk all day about it, but I think that's the overarching theme of what stands out to me of what went wrong. And then, of course, the incompetence of defense counsel. And I really do just want to mention that, I really appreciate that point about jury verdicts being sort of sacred in our system. I do think that a lot of people have a perception that if a jury makes a mistake, it'll get fixed on appeal. And that's just really not how our system works. It's designed to fix legal errors. If the judge gives the wrong instruction or makes the wrong ruling about the admission of evidence, but it's not there to second guess the jury. There really isn't that kind of safety safety net for faulty jury verdicts.
Jason Flom, you the host of Wrongful Convictions podcast. We'll get into that a bit more. Would you have taken on the Adnan Syed case yourself?
Absolutely, and I think what's important to recognize is that these problems that have been identified already, tunnel vision, racial bias, a rush to judgment by authorities, and then confirmation bias, exist in case after case, as well as so many other causes of wrongful convictions that we see again and again. Lying eyewitnesses who also in many cases are incentivized, authority figures, police and prosecutors who are upwardly mobile and who are looking to climb the ladder on the back of their record. They're not looking necessarily for justice. They're looking to they look at it as almost like a scorecard because they want to move up in the world. They're ambitious people, right? They're hard-driving, ambitious people. That doesn't excuse the idea that you are willing to indict and ultimately convict and send to prison for the rest of their life or even to death a person who very likely is innocent. And we see that in case after case. So it's important that we're focusing on Adnan Syed, but we must also recognize that there may be as many as 100,000 other Adnan Syeds stuck in prison right now as we're having this conversation in this gulag system that we have in America, right at this very moment, who need the attention that he benefited from. And it's exciting and wonderful to see that that podcast had this incredible impact. You know, they say pressure breaks pipes. And in this case, Serial, you could draw a straight line from Serial, and of course his legal team was incredible on appeal. And ultimately that led to his freedom. But we cannot forget the many, many, many people that have been left behind. And
Jason, that is an incredible number. Did you say 100,000 possible Adnan Syeds out there?
Yes, and the way I get to that number, so the social scientists that have studied these things have estimated that between 4 and 7% of people in prison in America are actually innocent. I believe that number to be much higher, and we don't have enough time on this show to get into the reasons why, but if you just take a mid-case scenario and you say that these social scientists who have studied this issue, if you come up with 5.5% and you have almost 2 million people in prison in America right now, the very simple math leads you to a number that is right around 100,000 actually innocent people, many of whom, as Herman Lindsay was, are on death row in America, where, of course, we are the only Western country that has the death penalty. Every other Western country abolished it generations ago.
Vinoo Varghese, can I just throw that point over to Vinoo Varghese? You know, you've been a prosecutor. Do you recognize what Jason is saying about the ambitious prosecutor and the possibility that there are 100,000 wrongfully convicted people in prison right now?
That number would not surprise me at all. When I was a prosecutor in the early 2000s in the Brooklyn DA's office, we knew that there was a very thin line between good and evil, because everyone was lying to us. The cops were lying to us. The alleged victims were lying to us. So our motto was, let's make sure no innocent person would go to jail. When I left the district attorney's office, and I felt very good about my office at the time, when I left and started practicing it in state court in other counties and other parts of the city, as well as in federal courts all around the country, I came to a quick realization that most prosecutors are not doing what they were taught in law school. Every student in America, and the professor on here, and she can back me up on this, is that they're told that justice, that a prosecutor should not be trying to get a notch on, his or her belt, and they're there to do justice and not secure convictions. That's just not true. There are too many prosecutors here who are in this, and I can speak, I've been in federal courts all around the country. And while there are a number of great prosecutors, I don't want to belie the number of people that go into it for the right reason. There are just too many people who are there to advance their careers here in New York, in Manhattan, and in particular, the federal court system here. They're there to get one case and then get a job, nice job, in a cushy, large Wall Street law firm. And to me, I think justice be damned. So it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Okay, let me throw this over to Barbara now. Barbara, let's talk about the power of podcast. How important was the Serial podcast in freeing Adnan Syed?
I mean, it was obviously very important. It brought a tremendous amount of attention to the case. I do believe that the podcast that followed it, Undisclosed, really brought out more and uncovered more new evidence that I think ultimately led to his exoneration. I do want to go back to a point that was made earlier about there being so many other Adnan Syeds in prison. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I don't know how many, no one knows for sure. But if you think about so in many ways, people in the registry, there are many people in the registry who did not have high profile exonerations, but in almost all of them, something extraordinary happened, something outside the ordinary legal system happened to free them. And that's what happened in this case. It took people outside of the legal system that was supposed to correct errors, to bring attention to the case, to uncover new evidence. And we see that over and over and over again in the exonerations that we catalog in the registry, that the system isn't working most of the time. It takes something extraordinary. There's a tremendous amount of luck involved in being exonerated, which sounds crazy because obviously Adnan Syed's not a lucky man. He spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. But there's luck involved in having attention paid to your case and getting the attention of the right people, of having at least some resources to be able to reinvestigate the case, because the obstacles are just so high. So I can see, this isn't the only example of a podcast doing this kind of work. A couple of years ago, Curtis Flowers out of Mississippi, there was an outstanding podcast, In the Dark, that uncovered a lot of new evidence that really did contribute to his ultimate exoneration.
And that's happening with your podcast too, isn't it, Jason? The Wrongful Conviction podcast. Can you give us an example of where your work has helped to free an innocent man? And can you also give me some idea of the work that you have to do to make your podcast as influential as it is?
Yes, well, thank you for asking that. And the fact is, one case that comes to mind is Lamont McIntyre, who was framed by police in Kansas City. There was a horribly corrupt and violent cop named Golubsky who was systematically framing black people. He was carrying on so many other illegal activities that we don't have nearly enough time to cover them. But the fact is that Lamont was framed, and our podcast helped to bring attention to his case that brought him to call me from the courthouse steps when he was freed after 23 years and say that his legal team had told him that the attention that we were able to bring helped to unlock the prison doors, very literally, and he's been fully exonerated. And now, fortunately, just 2 weeks ago, that cop was finally arrested and charged with many, many crimes. But they will never be able to catalog the number of crimes that this particular individual committed. So Lamont McIntyre, Ronnie Long, Vincent Simmons, Daniel Villegas. There have been so many that we are so thrilled and humbled and proud to have been able to shine a light on. And I want to make one other point, which is that as in Adnan Syed's case and in these other cases, Lamont McIntyre or whichever one you want, and I hope people will take a chance to listen to his episode of our podcast, Wrongful Conviction, the actual murderer is allowed to remain free by virtue of the fact that these authorities have decided to convict someone who didn't commit the crime. In our new podcast, Bone Valley, it's exactly that situation. The actual murderer was allowed to remain free when Leo Schofield went to prison for the murder of his wife. He's been there for 34 years. And this guy went on to murder other people.
Jason Flom and Barbara and Vinoo, thank you all very much for your contributions to the Nexus. We've run out of time, I'm afraid. Thank you, though.